Hello BookTube. In the wake of the release of Heated Rivalry, there has been a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, about romance fandom, and in particular the fandom around romance. While romance historically as a genre is one that has been championed by women for women, and therefore a lot of women, understandably so, feel very protective of this genre, a lot of toxicity has come about from that in the wake of Heated Rivalry's success, with a lot of women not acting like good allies to queer men and being very exclusionary and very gatekeepy around the Heated Rivalry fandom and around the fandom when it comes to romance in general. I shouldn't have to go into the reasons as to why that isn't okay. Obviously, stories that focus on queer relationships are for queer men also, but a lot of queer men don't see the same level of success in the romance genre compared to their female author counterparts. And while I love Heated Rivalry and I'm really grateful to Rachel Reed for the story that she has written and for everybody involved in creating the TV show, which I thought was fantastic and had a great time with, I also recognise the need to uplift the voices of male writers of romance and non-binary writers of romance in the publishing world and in bookish spaces as well. For me, romance is a bit of a newer genre. I never used to be big into romance until the last sort of 2 years, I would say, and it has gradually become more of a fixture of my reading life, and it was one of my biggest read genres last year, actually, quite surprisingly to me. And not just in the contemporary space, I'm talking historical romance, fantasy romance, more literary romance, things like that as well. And so while some of these books are older favourites, I've been on a bit of a mission in January, and we'll discuss this more at length when I do my sort of January media book and film wrap up, which will probably be the next video that comes out after this from me. I've been on a bit of a mission to read even more books by particularly male authors of romance, so that I could come to you with a more diverse range of stories and voices and shine a light on some of the books that I've really loved from romance authors who are not women. So I have a list of 10 books for you today that are written by gay and queer men or non-binary or trans folks, and yeah, let's just get into it. The first book I'm not going to talk to you at length about because I read it in a reading vlog and I've spoken about it fairly recently, and that is You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince by Timothy Janovsky. This is a Christmas romance following essentially a Nepo baby character who is banished by his parents to his grandparents' small town for the holidays to kind of avoid a looming PR disaster involving him buying a private island. While he's there, he is really struggling with the very different way of living in his grandparents' home, and he is also struggling because he is forced to bunk with their lodger, who is a student of his grandfather's at the local university. They initially butt heads, they don't get on at all, they do not like each other one bit, but they get to know each other after they both agree to organise the town's annual fundraiser for the Small Business Association. And over the course of organising this event, walls come down, barriers come down between the two, they form a kind of They develop a camaraderie, and that develops into a romance. And it's very sweet, very cute, very Christmassy. I haven't liked Timothy Janovsky's books in the past, or in particular I haven't liked Never Been Kissed. But this one really surprised me and I had a lot more fun reading it. So I would definitely be open to reading more books from Timothy Janovsky in future. He has another book in this particular series, I think it's called New Adult, which I would like to read. And then he has a few other books as well. One that particularly has caught my eye is You Had Me at Happy Hour, which sounds like it's going to be quite a fun one as well. From what I've read so far, I think Timothy Janovsky's books are quite light-hearted, quite fun, and a bit cheeky and whimsical. Not super serious, and touching on some themes of like mental health, but nothing too devastating by any means. The characters go on a really nice arc of personal growth, And yeah, it's just a cute and charming little Christmas romance that I'd really recommend to you if you're into that sort of thing. The next book is one I've not seen anyone else talk about. I happened across it on Everand on audio, and that is Fall Into You by Dylan Morrison, who is a trans author living in the States. This one follows a kind of similar story arc in a way to You're a Mean One, Matthew Prince, in that you have a kind of estranged son returning to their small hometown and sort of rediscovering community, starting to heal like mental wounds and trauma and things like that. But this one, it does feel a lot more serious and a lot more introspective. You have Will, who left his hometown 20 years ago and has been estranged from his parents ever since. When his father passes away, he learns that he has inherited his family's apple farm, and he returns to Glen River to sell the farm, basically. And there he butts heads with the farm's manager, Casey, and they initially can't stand each other. They really have some quite heated arguments. And there is a real intense dislike between the two of them, but events unfold and Will has to spend more time in Glen River than he was initially planning to, and he develops this budding friendship with Casey that develops into more of a romance, but he also rediscovers friendships with people that he knew as a teenager. This one feels like a great entry point into romance for somebody who is maybe more used to contemporary fiction. The romance in this is not super heavy as the focus. It's much more introspective than that. It focuses a lot on Will's trauma and the cycles of trauma that his family have kind of perpetuated on one another, and breaking that cycle, coming to terms with the idea that he doesn't live up to the expectations that his family put on him, dealing with the estrangement of his parents after the fact when they have both passed away, and what that means for him. He's been quite a lonely individual since leaving home, although he does have a best friend who doesn't feature in the book nearly enough for my liking, because she's pretty fantastic as a character. I really enjoyed the best friend character in this. And it focuses a lot more on Will kind of unpacking his trauma and his childhood and the negative impact it's had on him, and learning to heal and move on from that. And it's less focused on like the sort of cutesy character moments. So I think this would be a great one if you are someone who hasn't read any romance or very little romance and you kind of want to just dip a toe. The scenes are also fade to black. It's not like a super smutty one by any means at all. It's a bit more slow and meandering. There's still quite big plot points that happen, but in between those bigger plot points, there's a real sense of just Will's mind turning and his emotions unfolding as he kind of unpacks all of this trauma that he's been carrying around. Some parts of this were incredibly moving, and so I would very much recommend it if you're a fan of romance, but also if you are someone who leans more into contemporary and things that are a little bit more character focus as opposed to like super plot heavy. I think this would be a great one for you. Dylan Morrison also has another book out that I'm yet to read, Recipe for Trouble, and he has another book coming out in 2026 which is called Second Helpings. So I'm getting food themes which I've enjoyed in romances in the past, things that focus around cooking, chefs, cooking shows, things like that. So I'm keen to check out more books by this author in future. The next book we have is one that I think I've spoken about in the past, which is The Paperboys by D.P. Clarence. This is a more comedic leaning book and it's really charming. It follows these two kind of rival journalists, Sunny and Ludo. They work at very different papers and they come from very different class backgrounds, and this does a lot of work in sort of unpacking that and looking at how two people can develop a relationship when they come from very, very different backgrounds. Sunny is working at this kind of rag. It's very much based on like the Sun, and he's really unhappy there because he wants to be doing more serious political journalism. And then you have Ludo, who is working at a very prestigious paper that is owned by his father. So again, a little bit of a nepo baby situation going on there. They have to kind of unwittingly start to work together when they both kind of happen upon information that is suggestive of some wider political corruption that they want to then uncover. So this one balances a very cute romance between two very sweet and funny characters, but also this plot line of like journalism and political intrigue, and so it has those two things running concurrently alongside each other, and it makes for a very propulsive read. It's very pacey and it's a really quick read because of that, but you still get the really nice character development between Sunny and Ludo, and Sunny and Ludo are incredibly sweet together. I really loved them as a couple. Unfortunately, I read Going Solo, D.P. Clarence's second novel, in January, and I didn't like it very much. I won't discuss here, I'll talk in my media wrap-up video, but his third book in the series, Much Obliged, is coming out this year, and I'm very keen to read that one still, because I think it's focused around like a reality dating show, which I'm a sucker for. I don't even know why. I don't watch reality dating shows in real life. I don't find them that interesting. But if you write a book about one, I'll eat it up every time. I don't know, it's just one of my favourite tropes is like reality TV shows. So yeah, for some reason I'm really drawn to that in writing. So I'm very keen to pick up Much Obliged, even though Going Solo didn't live up to the Paperboys for me, but I would still really recommend that you check the series out because the Paperboys is really lovely, really funny, and I enjoyed that one a lot. The next couple are much more comedic, I would say. In particular, this next one, See You at the Finish Line by Zach Hammett. This is a sports romance, so if Heated Rivalry has got you in the mood for more sports romance, this is a fun one. It's one where you have to kind of suspend your disbelief a little bit. It's a little bit silly in terms of where the plot goes. So if you can accept that it's going to go to some ridiculous places and just have fun with it, then I think you'll have a good time. But this is a rivals to lovers story about two rowers on the same team at Cambridge. One is Lucas, again from a very working class background. He's had to work really hard to be where he is at Cambridge, and he struggles to kind of fit in with the other students in his peer group because they're all from very well off backgrounds. And he is very academic, very bright, and he is the coxswain in the rowing team, so he's a lot like physically smaller as well. And then you have George, who is from the States, and he is kind of given a spot at Cambridge for his sporting prowess, but he is not very academic at all. Lucas kind of unwittingly spills this to the press that George is able to coast by at Cambridge and hasn't really had to put in the work to pass his exams. He's gotten through the first 2 years of his degree on his sportsmanship and the fact that he wins these sporting events for the university, so they want to keep him around. And because of this, going public, the university decides, actually, George, you're going to have to sit your exams for real and pass. George's entire degree is at stake, and it's kind of Lucas's fault. But also, Lucas is also somebody who struggles socially, and he's been crushing on this guy called Amir for the longest time, but he has no idea how to approach him. He finds it really difficult to pursue people that he likes, whereas George is kind of known as a ladies' man, and he gets around and he has like no trouble with like hooking up with people and having relationships and all this. So they kind of come to this reluctant agreement whereby Lucas will coach or tutor George to help him pass his exams, which, given how much emphasis the author puts on how bad George is academically, it's very, very unbelievable to me. the leap that we would get to from George, where he is at the beginning of the novel, to him passing his degree at Cambridge, like, that felt like an impossible feat. To be honest, I think maybe the author could have laid off of painting George as really thick at the beginning of the novel to make it a bit more believable, and also just be a little bit kinder to poor George. He does get great development throughout the book, though, I will say. In exchange for this, George agrees to help Lucas become more confident in approaching people that he likes, and hopefully give him the confidence to speak to Amir. And obviously, throughout the course of this, they're going to realise they have feelings for one another, and George is somebody who's very much goes with the flow of life, and he's never really questioned his sexuality too intensely. But what I really enjoyed about this one is that when George does start to realise that he's having feelings for Lucas, he like leans into that completely. And he's like, okay, let's get on Grindr and see what being gay is all about. And he has like these like experimental kind of hookups, and he's thinking about his past experiences, and he's like, maybe there's always been something there. And he's just very open to it in a way that was really charming to read, and is a really nice break away from the kind of struggle that you're normally seen depicted, where somebody is really going through a lot of emotional turmoil to come out. George just is kind of like going with the flow of life, and he's just so open to like just being himself, whatever that may be in the end. And that was really lovely to read. So this is one that's, again, very funny, very silly. It does have some darker moments, but nothing very intense at all. So if you're looking for something that is like really light-hearted and fun, then this is the ideal book for you. Next, we have The Falcon and the Foe by A.J. Truman. This is the first book in a series called The Single Dads Club, and it focuses on two single dads in their 40s who, again, rivals to lovers. They do not get on at all. They know each other sort of tangentially from their sons being in the same year at school. They do not get on. They are two completely different people. Cal is more working class. He doesn't have as much privilege as Russ does. Russ is quite wealthy, has a good job. He's very respected by the other parents, whereas the other parents look down on Cal for being a bit more disorganized, having a job at a grocery store alongside voice acting that he does freelance. And everyone kind of sees him as like a bit of a slob, a bit messy, and they're very judgmental towards him as a result of that. And Russ is very much of that same opinion, and so they don't get on. And then Cal's son asks if he can join the Falcons, which is like this universe's version of like Boy Scouts, I guess. And Cal agrees reluctantly because Russ is like the troop leader. But it turns out that not only is Russ the troop leader, he's also in need of a co-lead. His sort of second in command, I suppose, has recently dropped out of the role, and so he desperately needs someone else around to coach the Falcons. And Cal decides to go for it, to be more involved in his son's life and his like extracurriculars and things like that. They initially come to blows. They don't see eye to eye on anything about how this like little scout troop should be run like at all. Russ is very serious. Cal wants them to use it as an opportunity to bond and have fun and make friends. Whereas Russ is like, we're going to learn like serious survival skills. Bearing in mind these kids are like 8 or 9 or something. They're quite young. But Russ takes this incredibly seriously, like it's a military academy or something. There's a lot of fighting. There's a lot of kind of comedic arguing between the two characters. And then they start to realise that underneath all of this tension, there's another kind of tension. They end up realizing that they actually do have more feelings for one another, and it develops from there. This one, I really enjoy the fact that the protagonists were older. I feel like in a lot of romances that I've read, a lot of romances I've read in general, to be honest, the characters are like young, they're like in their 20s. So it's nice to read about these two single dads in their 40s. They're coming from two very different places in that Cal has always kind of been perpetually single, and he decides that he wants a family, and so he adopts his son as a baby, whereas Russ was married and his husband has unfortunately passed away and he's a widower. So they're coming to their single dadness in two very different contexts. And so because of that, there are discussions about moving on after grief. There's also the class difference dynamic between Cal and Russ, because they have two very different jobs and two different sort of levels of wealth and privilege. And the book does touch on those topics, but there's always still this levity and this comedic undercurrent throughout it. So again, if you want something that's more lighthearted, silly, funny, this is going to be a good one for you as well. There's also more books in this series, as I've said, that follow Cal's group of friends, call themselves the Single Dads Club, and I think there's another 2 or 3 books in the series that follow other characters you're introduced to. And A.J. Truman has loads of other books as well, and I think last year he published a hockey romance as well, which I haven't yet read, but I probably will check out. But I did really enjoy it. I had a good time. I listened to it on audio, and the audio was really decent, I have to say. I think the rest of the series is on Everand as well as audiobooks. I'll probably listen to the rest of those throughout the rest of this year, maybe. The next one is, again, quite comedic, but it does lean a little bit more into some serious topics at times. This one has been a bit of a bookster darling recently, and that is Winging It With You by Chip Pons. I've seen lots of people talking about this and recommending it, and rightfully so. It is a great time. This one follows Asher Bennett, who has signed up to this travel reality show competition called the Epic Trek, which I've not watched The Great Race, but apparently it's based on The Great Race. He has signed up to this because it's his boyfriend's dream to go on this reality show. And then he is unceremoniously dumped at the airport by said boyfriend as they are at the check-in gate. And so Asher doesn't know what the hell to do, because you have to go on this show as like a couple, or like, a duo. And the other character that we follow is Theo, who is a kind of workaholic pilot who has been told by his airline that he is grounded until further notice because he is repeatedly going over his hours that he can be flying. They're concerned for his mental health, and they want him to take time off of work until he can prove that he is addressing his work-life balance for his own mental well-being. And he doesn't know what to do with this because work is his life. So he's also in a bit of a pickle of his own because he doesn't know what he's going to do for the next several weeks. And then he runs into Asher, and they agree to fake date. Theo agrees to pretend to be Asher's boyfriend so that he can still compete on the Epic Trek. And so they go on this reality show competition together. They're flying all over the world together, competing in challenges in a very nonsensical way, I will say. I was glad the author addressed this and made a comment about it in the book, because they were flying to they flew to LA from Boston to fly back to Vermont, to go down to South America, to go to Portugal, to come back over to the US or something, and it made no sense the way that they were flying. But the author did comment on that. I think it was supposed to be a comedic aspect to the book, because at first I was like, why are you taking this route? That doesn't make any sense at all. As will always happen in a fake dating context, they start to realise that actually they do have a mutual attraction for one another, and will they, won't they, can they get it together and become a real couple and win this reality competition and all this good stuff. And this is just such a romp. If you want something that's really plot heavy and it's just gonna whisk you away all over the world on this magical silly adventure, then this is a great one for you. Asher and Theo are so compelling as characters. They've got a lot of emotional depth to them. It was a nice take on a grump sunshine kind of book, because Asher's usually the grump and Theo's usually the sunshine, but they do have moments where those roles are a little bit reversed, which was quite nice. They didn't stay within their stereotypical tropes throughout the whole book, and they felt really balanced as characters. They had a lot of chemistry. There were some really great side characters in this that we get introduced to that I enjoyed reading about. One thing I would have liked a little bit more from in this is to slow down and have a little bit more of the reality show element to it, but that's just because I love reading about reality shows. I don't even know why I love this so much. If anyone else loves this trope as much as I do, can you let me know in the comments so that I know I'm not alone? This is a lot of fun, very compelling, very charming romance at the centre of it. I thought this was Chip Pond's first book, but it turns out it is not at all. He has You and I Rewritten, I think is the name of his other novel, and then he has Dearly Departed coming out later this year, which I'm very excited about, because that is a romance focusing on Hades trapped in the mortal world falling in love with a florist, which just sounds fantastic. And I'm already seeing people who have arcs raving about it, and I'm very excited to pick that one up next. So yeah, Chip Pons is definitely an author you need to check out if you haven't already and you're a fan of MM romance. Next, I have a second chance romance to talk about, which is also fake dating, and that is I Think They Love You by Julian Winters. Julian Winters has mostly written YA romances, I believe, or YA contemporary, and this I think is his first sort of adult debut romance. And this follows two former college sweethearts, Braylon and Denz. They fell in love at college, and then Den's got his heart broken when Braylon moved to London after graduation and left him behind. And then we are several years in the future. They're both in their mid-20s. Dens is working for his family's very prestigious and very successful events management company, and he's kind of like a low-level celebrity. He's got like a big social media following, and his family are often in the press for coverage of the events that they run for like various celebrities, these like very high-profile events for politicians and movie stars and socialites and things like that. At the start of the book, Dens's father, the CEO of 24 Karat Gold, the company, announces that he's going to be retiring, and this sets up a kind of competition between him and his older sister Cami, who both put their names in the running for next CEO, and his dad decides to kind of challenge them to create and organise an event each, and then based on the success of those events he will decide who his successor is going to be. People in Dens's family are not super supportive of this. His aunts in particular are quite vocal in their opinion that they don't think he is serious or committed enough for the role of CEO. And in a misguided attempt to prove them wrong, he announces that he has a serious long-term boyfriend that none of them knew about, which is not the case. Dens has been kind of shagging his way through Atlanta since things broke off with him and Braylon, and he hasn't been in a committed, serious relationship. He doesn't really see that for himself and his future. He initially ropes his best friend into agreeing to fake date him throughout the course of these events that are being run until CEO is announced. But when his best friend fails to show up for a family dinner when they are going to announce that they're together, he ends up running into his ex, who is now back in the States, and very rushed last minute decision decides to ask him if he will fill in and be the fake boyfriend, and he agrees. And so you have these two exes who are now fake dating each other, and you kind of go back into the past a little bit to see what Braylon and Dens's relationship was like in college, and then see them together now as they kind of rekindle their feelings for one another. But Dens is also dealing with the pressures of his family legacy, whether being the CEO of 24 Karat Gold is even what he really wants for himself, or if he just feels like this pressure to follow in his father's footsteps. And so there's a lot of introspection, there's a lot of emotional growth, particularly for Dens, but Braylon is also dealing with some of his own issues. His reason for coming back to the States is that his father passed away, and his mother had already passed away when he was young, so he now has both of his parents are gone, and he's quite lonely, and he doesn't really have any community around him. This is quite a tender romance. You see the two of them kind of tentatively like testing the waters to see if this is something that they can pursue again, and when they do start to like hook up and things, it's like, okay, are we going to keep this casual? Is this going to go somewhere? And yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like, if you like a second chance romance, I think this is a good one, because I don't think there's really like a villain of the piece in some second chance romances. None that I've read, because I haven't read a lot of second chance romances. If you've got recommendations for those, leave them down in the comments. I've heard people talking about second chance romances and saying that sometimes one of the partners has done something pretty egregious, which is why they've broken things off, and then it's hard to root for the relationship because one of them feels like a villain, whether that's like a cheating storyline or what have you, some kind of like intense emotional betrayal. Whereas in this one, you know, I think it's quite normal for young people to break up after graduating from school or from college, and you know, you go separate ways in life, and it's not because one person has necessarily betrayed the other. In Braylon's case, he asked Dens to come to London with him, and Dens kind of stalled until Braylon was like, I've got to go. I think it's quite a realistic reason for a breakup, so it didn't really feel like either of them had betrayed the other, even though in Dens's family's eyes, Braylon is like the guy who broke his heart by running away to London, but it's a lot more complicated than that, and you never really get the sense of like disliking Braylon for making that decision. I did feel throughout the book, which does sometimes happen when there's like a side plot romance hinted at throughout. I had it when I was reading Kiss Her Once for Me. The brother and like the childhood best friend had this like thing going on, like kind of behind the scenes that was hinted at, and I was like really interested in hearing more about that, so much so that it overshadowed the main romance for me at parts. And this one has a little bit of that, in that Jamie has the best friend who's supposed to fake date Denz, has this, like, there's whisperings of like something is going on with Denz's cousin, and I really wanted to learn more about that. And then I found out that Julian's next book is First Kiss, or First Last Kiss. That's coming out in May this year, and that follows Jamie and Jordan's Will They Won't They. So I'm really excited to read more from Julian Winters, because I was really invested in finding out more about those two characters, so I'm really keen to pick that one up in future. I will say, in putting together this list, I'm aware that it's very white, and Julian Winters, I believe, is the only author of colour that I featured on the list. Think They Love You is not the only romance by an author of colour that I have read, but unfortunately is the only one that I've enjoyed enough to want to recommend. I have also read Stars in Your Eyes by Case & Callender, which I unfortunately didn't enjoy at all. And a lot of the other authors I'm coming across are writing in the YA space, which is like totally fine and valid, but it's just not what I'm looking for. It would do those authors a disservice to read YA romances that I know I'm not going to enjoy, because I'm not the audience for it. And I know some people love reading YA even though they're adults, and that's like totally cool if that's what you want to do, but this just doesn't work for me. Like, I'm beyond my YA kind of enjoyment. I have a couple of YA books left on my TBR that I am interested to read, but they're more so like sci-fi fantasy than they are, as opposed to being romances. I'm not really interested in reading about teenagers falling in love. I'm just not. And so I haven't picked up any of those because I wouldn't want to read them and then like review them negatively, because they were never going to work for me in the first place. I did also try and read Footballista, but I DNF'd that one, wasn't a fan at all. There are a few other authors of colour who have books that I'm interested to read. I think Jeffrey K. Davenport is one, but I've had real trouble finding a way to read that book outside of Kindle. And then Kosoko Jackson also has a book that I'm quite interested in picking up as well, so I'll probably get around to reading that one in the foreseeable future. But if you have any more recommendations for not just any queer romances by authors of colour, then please leave them in the comments below, as I would love personally to check them out. And I'm also aware that that is a bit of a failing of this list, is how dominated by white authors it is. So I just wanted to address that in the video. I'm aware that it is very white. Now I want to talk to you about my top 3 romances by non-women authors. I've saved the best to last. These 3 are some of my favourite romances of all time. I love them all dearly, and I highly recommend, if you take any recommendations away from this book, these 3 in particular are my top tier books that I would really recommend to you. The first of those is one of the earliest contemporary romances that I read on a complete whim. I was very new to the genre, and it just absolutely hooked me from the beginning, and I feel very, very fondly about it, and that is Second Chances in Newport Stephen by T.J. Alexander. This is another second chance romance. We follow a trans man who returns from New York to his Florida hometown after a public scandal about the TV show that he was involved in has threatened to derail his career as a TV writer. So he kind of flees home for the holidays to shelter and recuperate with his parents for a little while. And while he's home for the holidays, he runs into Nick, who was his high school boyfriend, but they dated pre-Eli's transition. So Nick has never met Eli as a man. Things have changed for Nick as well. Nick is now a divorced single father, so their lives are very, very different from when they were together as teenagers, and they spend time together, they become friends, and Nick starts to realise that he feels attracted to Eli now as a man just as much as he did before Eli's transition. And this was a really lovely later life coming out story. It has demisexual representation that I really enjoyed. Nick and Eli have so much chemistry. They are both individually very lovely and sweet characters who have great side characters around them. Eli's parents in particular are just, they're these two like kind of bumbling idiots, but they are like trying their best to be like good allies to Eli, particularly given that they are in Florida, which is not a particularly trans-friendly place to be, small-town Florida. Like, they're so well-meaning, but they are a bit bumbling and a bit foolish and silly at times, and it's really, really charming to read. And then Nick's former partner and the mother of his child and his daughter as well are both really lovely characters with a lot of depth and sweetness to them as well. I really enjoyed seeing a really functional and healthy co-parenting dynamic between two divorced people. I think that's always really nice to see in any book, but in a romance in particular. And yeah, I just really love this. Like, this book is probably wholeheartedly the reason why I still read contemporary romance, because I did not expect to love it as much as I did when I read it. I got it from the library on a complete whim and it blew me away. I've since read other books from TJ Alexander and enjoyed most of them. Wasn't the biggest fan of Chef's Kiss. Chef's Choice, which is T for T, male-female couple, was great. Loved that one. And then I recently read The Earl Meets His Match, which is a historical trans romance as well, which is also very good. I think out of all of them so far, Second Chances and Newport Stephen may be my favourite. Maybe tied with Chef's Choice. Those two are like maybe neck and neck. They're both very good. I haven't read Triple Sec, which is their poly romance, but I have that on my TBR and I will get to it fairly soon. I would like to get to it fairly soon. So you don't see a lot of poly representation in romances, or like more mainstream romances, I guess. Like traditionally published romances and things like that. But yeah, love this one with my whole heart. It's fantastic, and is a weird one because it's Christmas themed, like it's set at Christmas, but it's also in Florida, so it's hot. So I read it in like June and I didn't feel like reading a Christmas romance. So I was thinking on this earlier, and I could be really tempted to reread this one around Christmas to see if I still love it just as much as I did when I read it like a year and a half ago, I want to say. Really enjoyed Eli and Nick's relationship and how it kind of unfolds really like tenderly, because like Nick's kind of discovering his queerness for the first time, and yeah, really enjoyed this one. The next book I have to recommend to you is another sports romance, and this one also features a trans main character, and that is The Prospects by KT Hoffman. I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard of this one before, because it's again all over Bookstagram. People love this book, and rightfully so. It is fantastic. The writing in this is stellar. This follows Gene, who is the first openly trans baseball player in the US, and he is on this team called the Beavers, kind of finding his footing as a trans athlete in the public eye, and then his former teammate turned rival. They're not exactly rivals, but they just like, they've had this kind of falling out in college and they've never reconciled since then. His name is Luis. He gets traded to Gene's team, and at first they really struggle to work together, and then I think their coach tells them they need to get their shit together and work it out so that they can like actually be on a team together. And so they start spending more time together. They rekindle this friendship that they used to have in college, and then Luis like comes out to Gene and is like, I'm also queer. And so it's like this budding romance between the two of them. But there's also really great camaraderie on this team. It focuses a lot in particular on their teammate, I think his name is Vince, who is an older player who's approaching retirement, who is also queer and married to his husband, and they're kind of talking about what life is going to look like for Vince after this season. Everyone kind of knows this could be the last time Vince plays. That is also a big theme within the book, and how Gene like tries to show up for his friend but doesn't always go about it in the right way, and their relationship is really realistic and interesting to read about as well. Their friendship is really great. This is just fantastic. This deserves all of the hype that it's received online. I know nothing about baseball. I'm English. I don't think any English people know anything about baseball. It's not really so much of a thing over here, so I don't know anything about baseball. And this is the second baseball romance that I've read, the other one being You Should Be So Lucky by Cat Sebastian. And they're both great, so maybe I need to start watching baseball. I don't know, maybe I'm missing out, but this still felt very accessible, even though I don't know anything about the sport. Yeah, throughout the book there's like commentary from these two like sports commentators throughout, which added like a sense of reality in that like you kind of seeing the broader perspective of like the sporting world on this team and what's going on this team, which was a nice element really added to for me, it added to like the realism of the book, even though I don't know anything about sports. Yeah, this is just fantastic. This is just such a great romance. And if you are a romance reader in any capacity, I would recommend this to you because it's so tender, so heartwarming, so nuanced in its portrayal of like various different relationships and friendships. And yeah, love this. Love it. It's fantastic. Read it. Please read it. The final book that I have to talk to you about is my favourite. I think if I had to pick one favourite from every book on this list, it would be this. And that is We Could Be Heroes by PJ Ellis, which is one that I don't see as much love for online. I don't think it's as well known as some of these other books I've talked about, and that is such a shame because this is so good. This is a dual timeline book. It mostly focuses on the contemporary timeline, which follows Patrick, who is an actor from the States who has come to Birmingham to film the superhero movie that he is starring in. And while he's in England filming, he happens to meet a bookseller slash drag queen, Will, and Patrick is closeted. His agent knows that he's gay and has told him, look, you can either be an out actor in Hollywood and fade to the periphery and not be offered as many roles and kind of become like this B or C list celeb, or you can be closeted and you can become like an A-lister who gets leading roles in like major Hollywood blockbuster films. You can't have it both ways in this industry. Unfortunately, it's not possible. The agent is also a queer woman, so this is coming from experience rather than the agent's internal prejudice, if that makes sense. Patrick is closeted and hasn't had like serious relationships with men because he's been prioritizing his career. He meets Will, all that starts to change. He develops these feelings for Will, and he is pulled into queer community for the first time through meeting Will's friends, being a bit more involved in the drag scene in Birmingham. Something I really loved about this one is it kind of talks about that debate that I've seen within the community about the difference between being gay and being queer, and showing up for your community in a way that matters and has an impact, as opposed to just being a person who happens to be gay, if that makes sense. And Patrick really has to reckon with that and reckon with how the impact of him coming out as gay would have these broader ripples that maybe are more important than himself, and what he can do as an openly gay actor to better things for his community in a way that he's never really considered before. He's always thought about his own experience and what it would mean for him in terms of his career and his life. Whereas through meeting and being part of a queer community through Will, he really has to reconcile that within himself. Like, can I continue living this lie, and is the person that's being harmed in that really just me, or is it a broader impact that I haven't considered before? And then the other timeline is we follow in 1940s New York, 1949 New York. We follow the lavender marriage of Charles and Iris, who are the creators of the comic that Patrick's superhero movie is based on. It looks at queer life in 1949, 1950s New York. It looks at their life. It looks at the secrets that they had to keep from the outside world, the impacts of that secrecy on their relationships and their whole lives. It's not as prevalent as the contemporary narrative. You just kind of get these glimpses back into the past every now and again. But Charles and Iris were still very well developed characters, and you still really cared about them, even though you didn't see them as much as you saw Patrick and Will. I think dual timelines can be quite difficult because you end up enjoying one timeline more than the other, but in this one I thought the balance was really well done. The historical timeline just worked really well to prop up and add more power, more nuance to what was happening in the contemporary timeline. Looks at the kind of legacy of queer media and how queerness was injected into media in a time of like the Hays Code in film, for example, where people couldn't be openly queer on screen or on the page. The way that has continued to impact generations of queer people years and years later. And it was so impactful, it was so powerful. The romance is still really great in this. Will and Patrick are two very compelling characters in their own right, and together they had a great relationship that I really enjoyed reading about. The side characters in this, again, fantastic, because Will has such an amazing community of queer people around him. I loved the exploration of the UK drag scene in this. It's not super prevalent, but it's there enough to give you like a sense of this like community of drag queens, give you an insight into what being a performer in that space is like. And it looks at sort of the backlash against like children's story time, like drag story time at libraries and things like that as well, and protest and activism. This book does so much, and I really don't see it getting the love that it deserves. People don't know that it exists, and that's such a shame. It's so good. I think if you liked Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, you would like this. I did not like that book, for full transparency. I thought that book was pretty bad, but this does a similar thing in a much more compelling way, I thought. And it looks at like how far queer people have come, but how far there is still to go. I loved the exploration of Hollywood, and given all of the like discourse around heated rivalry that's been happening in the media right now, and people wanting to know the sexuality of the actors involved in that show and demanding that information about people as if you're entitled to it, but also looking at how it's still not easy to be an out queer person in Hollywood. As Caleb Heron was talking about how a lot of people are still closeted in Hollywood because they will not be offered roles if they're out. And this addresses that and talks about that in a very candid and real way, and shows you the impact of having to make that choice. And I just, I thought it was really well done. The writing's fantastic. I cannot sing this book's praises enough. I really think it's great. If you were to take one recommendation from this video, I would implore you to make it this one. This could be recency bias. I did read this in January, and I think it's the best thing that I read. Spoilers for my reading wrap up. But yeah, I think this is fantastic, and I want more people to read it. So if you like contemporary, if you like historical, if you like all things queer romance, pick up We Could Be Heroes by PJ Ellis. And there you have it. Those are all of the books that I have to recommend to you today. I will, of course, continue to be on a mission to pick up more romances that are not written by women. Some that I have on my radar at the minute, I've got Boyfriend Material by Alexis Hall on my TBR. I have Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly, who I believe is a non-binary author. If you have other recommendations for me and for anyone else, please leave them in the comments. I would love to read more romances, not just romances, but queer romances in general, from people of all kinds of different walks of life, backgrounds and identities. So yeah, I would love to see lots of recommendations in the comments. If you've read any of the books in this video, let me know what you thought of them as well. I'd love to have a discussion with people in the comments about what they thought of the books in this video. May have a little bit of a break from romance. It's been a very romance heavy month for me. It's all I've really been in the headspace for. I don't know, Heated Rivalries had me in its grip, and so all I've wanted to do is read romance, but it's been a really fun month for it. But I do think it's time to move into some other spaces. I've been reading a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of like romantasy, to branch out again into other spaces and not just read only romance. But it's been a really fun month, and I've flown through so many books. I expected to really slow down with my reading this year. I've read 15 books. I've read loads of books already, because romance is just so pacey and so quick to get through. That's it from me for today. Hopefully see you again in my next video, and until then, stay safe and happy reading.